The first phase of this project was to figure out a design, and for the design we ended up going with some online plans from Spider Cards. Even though I had some ideas for some custom modifications I wanted to make, it was just good to have a base set of plans from which to start. We got all of the tubing, marked everything out, and started cutting. I even had my daughter help me with some of the marking, and I think she had a pretty good time. For the majority of the common angle cuts, I used a dry cut saw, and anything that was odd or a compound cut, I used an angle grinder. Once I had all the pieces cut, I set them aside in a somewhat organized fashion and then started laying them out, starting with the main base frame first. After I got everything all laid out and squared up, I then tacked everything into place and proceeded to finish off with full welds. Right now I'm working on the rear subframe that is going to hold the rear axle to the go-kart. So this piece is all done. You can see it's got a bracket right here to hold the axle assembly, and then this is just loose pieces. So once these are welded together, I will connect them together with some cross members, and that'll complete the rear portion of the go-kart. Now I've got both my front base frame and my rear base frame laid out just so I can get the orientation of where some of the uprights are going to go. And now I'm going to start tacking into place my lower uprights, which are these 3-inch pieces, onto some rear uprights, and then this will complete what will be the top portion of the front frame assembly. This section right here is going to be the back portion of where the back of the seats are going to sit. And I like to go 2.5 minus 1 line.
Minus 1 line.
It's easier math.
Easier mental math.
Yeah, that's a 16th. Well, whatever. Minus 1 line. It's something I've been really get in the habit of doing. I know. So right now I'm working on the front suspension arms, which I think is the most complex portion of this build. This one's already complete, and this is basically 1/2 of one side. The wheel will go right here, and both of these arms will pivot in unison. And this one is just comprised of 5 different pieces. I will have to weld some bushings on the end to allow them to pivot, and then a nut at the end to hold the spindle bracket that will eventually hold the front tire. You'll see here I'm using the first piece as a template piece to make the rest of the suspension arms, just tacking everything into place and then finishing off with full welds. Here I'm just grinding out a curved section on the ends of the suspension arms, and that is where a piece of tubing will be welded in place to hold the arms to the go-kart. And here I'm using a piece of 1/2-inch EMT conduit to keep all the pieces aligned while I'm tacking them into place. You'll see the brackets that are placed on the backside just to make sure everything is spaced properly. This section right here is the front suspension block, and this is what the front wheels and suspension arms will be mounted off of. It will also be the section that holds the front portion of the roll bar assembly. And then the last bit of welding was to add all of the pivot and suspension brackets. I think there was like 16 to 18 in total. Once I had all those welded on, I evaluated the rest of the scrap pieces I had, and I was able to fabricate a rear basket right here and then a top roof rack. The last phase of the build was mostly in regard to finishing up the mechanicals of the cart, adding the wheels, the suspension, connecting the front and rear subframes, and just getting most of the moving and functional parts together. The rear axle assembly is comprised of a sprocket, a disc brake, and two sets of bearings that are mounted to the bottom of the rear subframe by way of two small brackets.
Farther. That's enough.
That's good? Thumbs up?